In the previous movies, we were looking at the first way that we get information from a user, how to work with URLs and links, or GET requests. Now let's take a look at forms, which are often also referred to as POST requests because the data has been posted from a form to the web server. And let's see how forms work in PHP. I'm going to go ahead and make a fresh PHP page that I can work with. I'm going to do that by doing save as on the encoding page that I was working with. And I'm just going to call it form.php. Actually, we'll make it plural so that it's easier to remember. All the others have been plural so far. And we'll change the name of it to forms. And then let's go ahead and get rid of everything that we typed before, because now instead we want to put in a basic HTML form. And you're familiar with this kind of form. What I've put together is something that's a username and password. And we're going to send the results of that username password to an action called process.php. So we'll need another page that's going to do that. And we'll create that in a minute. You'll see that the method for the form is post. And that's the default method for forms. And that's where we get that idea of a post request. So it's posting it to the database once we submit. And then we've got several fields. I've just got username, where it's a text field. And I've got password, which is a password field, which works like a text field, except that it's going to blur out the password so that we can't actually see it while we type. And then submit, and that's going to be a submit button. So hopefully from HTML, you're familiar with a basic form like this. Once we create our PHP application in the later chapters, we're going to use something very similar to this to be able to log in and have administrator access to our application. So let's go ahead and just load this up in a web page. So we've got forms.php, and there we go. Now let's go ahead and drop in a couple of BR tags because I noticed that all of that is on one line. And I'll just drop those down there. And let's put another one here. And now when I reload it, I get something that's a little prettier. So we can type in values and we can hit submit, and they'll go to that form, which is process.php. So let's create that page now. I'm going to start it just by doing a save as. And let's do process.php. Now, of course, I'll need to open back up forms. So I'll just open back up my sandbox and get forms open as well. So now I've got both forms and I've got process. And we'll just change this to form processing. We obviously won't need to have the form a second time here, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. What we're going to want this processing form to do right now is just to display those values back to us on the page, so we can understand how we get values from the form. In truth, we would probably want to do something else with these values. We would want to send them to a database or maybe subscribe someone to a mailing list, log them into our application. And so we would process it in a different way. But for now, we're just going to echo those back. And we can do that with PHP. And you can probably guess the way that we could do that. That's going to be username equals, and then we're going to need also a password equals. And I'll leave what those are going to equal out for now until I go ahead and write my equal statement. So let's go ahead and do username, colon, and then we'll put in password. And we know how to do that. And that's all it's going to respond with. So the way that we talk to post variables is just like with get variables, underscore POST. And there's a post array for anything that's been posted, just like there was for the get array. And so when we want to access something out of it, we do it as an associative array, and we ask for username. And we can do the same thing, just copy and paste it. And instead of asking for username, we'll ask for password. Now, as long as we've sent it using those same names here, username and password, those variables will be created inside the post variable and will be accessible to us. Let's try it out. So we already have our form page loaded, and I'll type in my username here, and I'll type in a password, and then hit submit. And there we go. It came back with my username and password, and it was that easy to grab those variables from that post array. Now, remember, in the get chapter, when we were talking about encoding, post variables don't need to be decoded. Now, most of the time, get variables won't either. It'll do it for us. But post variables do not need to be encoded or decoded before we use them in this way. Now, of course, once we start working with forms in our application, we're going to want to start doing some validation on those values as well. And we'll talk about that when we get a little further along in our application. How we could check and make sure maybe that the username was above a certain number of characters or below a certain number of characters. We could check the format of the password, if there was a requirement that it be in a certain format. Or maybe you had someone submitting an email address, and we want to make sure that it really is a valid email address. And we could perform form validations, and then we'll learn to return errors on the form later on. But for now, I really want to focus just on how we're getting that data out of the post array so that we can work with it. And I think we've successfully seen that here. So we're ready to move on and look at our next way of getting information from the user, which is going to be cookies.